Pete Lawson, can we get him onto the Google Drive, even though he's a town employee?
Yeah, he actually has like a district email address. I don't know why that's not working for him, but yeah, we'll figure that out.
Yeah, he
at least he used to. Yeah, when I first came on, he had both a town and a district address. So yeah, we'll figure that out.
Yeah, I can work with them on that, Chris, if you want.
Okay.
Brian.
Hey, everyone.
So Jay, I have the when you want to start, I can throw up the agenda for the meeting, and and if you want to ask if there are members of the public who want to speak, they can raise their hands, and then I'll only take maybe 3 minutes to go through the website. We got a number of updates this time, including some legitimate questions coming in through the FAQ.
Do you want to do public comment before the website instead?
Yeah, we can do that.
We
did this long enough. I think people know how to raise their hand. We can try that. Yeah, maybe ask people to raise their hand while you're going down the agenda, so you give them a couple of minutes to find their buttons. Yeah. We have a quorum, although only barely, if you want to wait a couple of minutes.
When you figure the quorum, do you figure the missing person, or do you take it out of?
So we are, so my memory is it's a body of 11 plus an alternate. So I don't count the alternate. Yeah. But I should go back and see if the DAC position, which is Lisa, if that's included in the 11 or not.
Then we need 6, a minimum of 6.
Right.
Yeah. So we have that, but only barely.
Yeah.
I'm sure Colleen will be joining us. So I mean, Colleen and Todd, there were several people were just with us for 2 hours on the sustainability subcommittee meeting that went very, very well. I will say. I think let Colleen describe. No, it went very well. Mark was. I mean, actually, everybody was there. Todd was. Here comes Todd. Everybody showed up for that. It was a good meeting.
I tried 3 or 4 times saying, okay, I'm going to get to my computer and log on and to watch it, and didn't happen. The day just fell apart.
No, I had a bid opening and then another meeting. So.
I thought it went very well and was very productive.
Good.
Colleen's on. Mark.
Hey there.
Hey, Mark.
Mark.
I'm in the car for a little bit, but
it is 6:03. So why don't we get started and call to order? We have a quorum.
Recording in progress.
We're started. I'll bring up the agenda, Jay, if you want to go over it and ask people to raise their hand for a public comment.
So started 6:03. We have a pretty compact agenda. Anyone wants to chime in, raise your hand. Chris is monitoring it, and we'll call on you. And otherwise, I think Chris can give us an update on the website while we're waiting for public comment.
Okay, you want me to do that now?
Sure. If no one's, if you have no hands,
okay,
get right into it.
Give it a couple of minutes. All right, let me pull up the website here. I got multiple windows open tonight. I'll get there. Okay.
At least you're not out driving tonight.
Coming up. Okay. No, I'm not driving tonight. No hockey rink for me tonight. Although there is a pretty big deal women's Olympic hockey game coming up for any night owls who want to watch. Okay. Here we go. Everybody see this? So a few updates to the project website. The homepage has been updated to reflect really work in December, January, and then our decision-making in February, highlighting the N5 option that we selected as the preferred option. There's actually a direct link now from here to the design page. So I will click on that. And the design page has also been updated to reflect we made a choice. I'm not showing the renovation option down here, kind of for obvious reasons, because that was a wet blanket from the very beginning. So there's a very quick kind of summary of the difference between AR2 and N5. So I appreciate TAP-A making the graphics available. And as we've said before, we're keeping this very, very high level. If people want the details, they can always go to the presentation page. Let me move my display box over for a moment. Let's see, the media page. So I appreciate the Daily Times Chronicle is following this project. So rearrange the page a little bit. This was an article on the committee's work last week that just hit the press a couple of days ago. So I appreciate that. We also finally, as I think I mentioned last week, are getting legitimate questions now through the, as opposed to spam, through the FAQ address. So a couple of good questions have come in, some questions about, seeking clarification on what we know about costs between the different options that we evaluated and why. So TAP-A and Hill were helpful to give us a little bit of information about some of that early comparative analysis. And we clarified that since both N5 and AR2 are going to be in the PSR, there's more work that's being done on those. So we'll get a little more information in more detail. And then there was just a question about our enrollment, which I clarified a little bit in the answer. The enrollment says we're 7.5% below our high water mark. Not quite. If you look over the past decade, we're 29%. I'm talking about K5 at Lynch, where today's enrollment at Lynch as of October 1st is a 29% increase over the low water mark over the last decade. That was the 2012 school year, and we're about a 4.9% decrease from the 2018 school year. Some description here of the housing development that's going on, which I think we're all familiar with, much of which does directly impact Lynch. And then there was also just embedded in this a question about why the square footage looks a little different from the master plan. So it took some time to sort of describe the master plan didn't envision a 7-classroom pre-K suite, the expanded specialized learning center, and some of the specific space recommendations that come from the MSBA space template. So I appreciate TAP-A helping me out a little bit with some of the language there. And that's pretty much it. I would just remind people if they have questions on the project, you're welcome to submit them to lynch2025faq@gmail.com. We check that, frankly, every day and welcome your questions. So I think I will stop sharing there and I'll go looking for our agenda again. Jay, let me just see if we
any hands?
I'm looking. No hands raised. So
all right.
We have 3 folks, members of the public, no hands raised.
Okay, we will move on to approval of minutes from February 7th. Did those went out, John?
Yeah, I just got them out tonight, so I don't think anybody had a chance to look at them.
Okay, so we'll hold them until next week.
Yeah, that's fine. They're out there. They're on the website in draft form. If anybody would like to take them. Thank you, Frida, for getting that draft done.
All right, thank you, Don. And next will be Lynch Elementary update from Chris. You're going to take that?
No, I think we were going to throw it over to Charlie and his team.
Okay.
Chris, I had a question. This is Don. I'm sorry. Did we need to note the vote for MSBA on the option we're picking, or is that just strictly internal?
I think that's going to be part of what we vote on the February 28th.
Okay,
That's
right.
when we're estimating our PSR authorization.
Right. Okay.
Is that right, Charlie or Andy?
Yes. I will need the meeting minutes again, so we can help with that. Thanks.
Well, these will be out there. So, and then the next ones, and the next ones.
All right, thank you.
It's a good question.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Let me, so somebody has to let me share the screen.
apparently.
Andrew, can you help me? I stopped sharing.
Okay, now I can do it.
There we go.
Cool. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, if you go up to the top,
Yeah.
Charlie, Max, there you go.
Yeah. So that's there. How about that? Everybody good with that?
Good for me. Yeah.
Okay, you see a picture? Okay, so we have two things on the agenda. One is a quick update of where we are with the design, and the other is phasing and logistics, which we said we would discuss tonight. And phasing and logistics truly does inform the design exercise, the cost, the schedule, everything. So it is critical. And it also is a requirement, which it should be, I think reasonably so, of the MSBA that we talk to them in this PSR submission about at least an approach. So, and there are implications around that. So it is sort of mission critical. In terms of the design, we're continuing to push and pull on the plans. I think we will continue for a few more days to push and to pull on the plans. We can only get so far so fast, and it is a lot to grapple with just because of the challenges of the site. But we have updated the plans somewhat. This is actually an updated. This is an updated site plan, and you can see. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
So we have enlarged the space in front of the school in terms of play and outdoor classroom space. We continue to have the two pickup drop-off zones, one coming in from the east, one coming in from the west. The one that comes in from the west, cars are in blue. They come down and have a dedicated car loop. The buses can actually come down Brantwood Road and take a left into the curb cut that's currently the service curb cut and come around and drop off. And whether there's 3 or 4 buses, they can queue there. So we have 2 different zones for pickup and drop off. Presumably the east side would be where many of the pre-K parents would drop off. However, for pre-K kids who come in a bus, it's an easy walk over to the pre-K entrance.
Charlie, can I ask you real quick? If you go to the top of your screen, you see the 71.7%. Can you like bump that up a little bit just for folks maybe have an easier time seeing it?
I'm sorry. Sure. Go to 100? Or is that going to go right off the page?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. So there is now we've introduced parking over in the eastern part of the site, and that's to get adequate parking sort of distributed across the site. We do have about the same amount of parking spaces on either side. There's currently around 90 plus spaces on site. We're proposing about 128. There's still that, which we had a conversation about at the last meeting, the idea that you can have a connector, that red arrow at the bottom of the site, that can connect the site for public safety purposes, or if you want, ultimately for operational reasons. We are just outside of the 500-year flood zone. We're just outside of the 200-foot Rivers Act setback. We're just within reasonable accommodation of topography at this edge of the site. So we're squeezed right in. And when you see the phasing plans, you'll understand quite how tight that is. So that's really the proposed site plan. Does anybody have any questions about the site plan? It's not a dramatic departure from the previous one, but it is more refined and more thought through.
It's good.
Okay. Now what do I do here? So the next slide is a slide that was presented today during the sustainability meeting. And it really is just from the civil engineer beginning to talk about concepts around dealing with creating a sort of sustainable and resilient site for stormwater. This will again be further developed. One of the things it really is useful for, though, is you can really see those regulatory setbacks. The 500-year floodplain in orange, the 100-year floodplain in blue. I misspoke when I said within the 100-year wetland setback buffer. And it shows potential bioswales, potential underground infiltration, et cetera. And again, this is preliminary, but I think at least there's some thinking around how to develop this site in a resilient and sustainable way. So I think that's positive. The estimators generally have this scope, so they have something to go on for this early preliminary PSR estimating exercise. The next, I'm going to have to get smaller here now. I think the next image is an actual floor plan that's developed from the previous floor plan. A little bit, the premise is still the same. Really, the big change here is that we started to look at putting the stage to the north side of the gym instead of between the cafeteria and the kitchen, because we were trying to figure out a way to really have an adjacency between the kitchen and the cafeteria. And we really haven't had a conversation with the district yet about how they want to work the stage operationally. So this may change yet again, but this was us trying to figure out a reasonable way to get service. We need to be able to get deliveries into the building. We need to be able to cook, and we need to be able to serve and have the cafeteria work. We also need to have access to the gym from the lobby, and we need reasonable back of house. So we're trying this whole the western quadrant. We're trying to sort of sort out those elements, and I think we're still working on it. The organization of the first floor beyond that remains very much the same. We're actually laying out this big brown box which says administration. That has a whole lot of rooms in it. Those we sort of have a plan for, but are not reflected here. Music is the blue box above that, which has a reasonable adjacency to the gym and for performances if they want to move any instruments and stuff in there. And pre-K and K continues to be on the first floor. There's a nice adjacency to the rear of outdoor classroom space. Then, as I mentioned, the pre-K is right in front. So when kids, pre-K students can come out and play and get picked up, or they can be dropped off and play and go in. Pre-K administration is right at that entrance. So we have a controlled pre-K entrance. We also, of course, have a controlled main entrance. The building can be zoned off so that it has basically a public side and an academic side, which means it could be zoned off for evening, weekend use, where you had doors that prohibited people from going into the classroom wing, but they could use potentially music, they could use gym, they could use restrooms, they could use cafeteria. They potentially could go upstairs and use the library, and they could even go upstairs again and use the STEM space if there was any sort of adult development kind of adult courses or anything like that. So there's a way to create sort of a public zone around this lobby that I think could be quite effective. There is the ability to go outdoors from the eastern side as well for pre-K, and we have a cantilevered classroom at the end, which provides a shelter. And that was something actually during visioning there was some interest expressed in that, the possibility of a covered outdoor space for the youngest children. So we're trying to figure out how to accommodate that. So that's the first floor. The second floor continues to be grades 1, 2, and 3. Each floor has a self-contained special education classroom, as well as a resource room and a small group room. So all 3 floors have that. This is beginning to show some extended learning zones outside of the classroom, so that there becomes this opportunity to have students both in the classroom and directly adjacent to, but outside the classroom for small group work, independent learning, one-on-one work, special projects, which is also something we talked about during the visioning sessions. This actually has 2 sets of bathrooms because there was interest expressed in having first grade have their own set of facilities, which is fine and we can do. And then the library is at the end of this corridor. It's got an elevator right in the middle of it right now, which might not be ideal. So we have to figure that one out, but we're looking at it. We're beginning to lay out restrooms and those kind of things. So these plans will probably have one more iteration before they go to the MSBA, and that will probably include doors, some more, detail around bathrooms, a little bit more detail. But at some point, we're just going to put our pencils down because we're going to have to make this submission. And then the top floor is kind of cool. It's got art and STEM. So we have a STEM classroom, again, with an elevator right in the middle of it, which is terribly awkward. We have a STEM classroom that overlooks the library, which is pretty neat, overlooks media, right at the top of the stairs. So there's a continuity there between the media center and STEM and art. And I think there's real opportunities to kind of connect STEM and art together so that you can expand both those programs. So there's often an interest in digital media, whether, having digital graphic lab, these kind of things that I think STEM could set up to help art do. I think art could expand as kind of curriculum if it had a maker space adjacent to it. So I think there's some nice adjacencies there. There's people who've raised their hands. Well, let me just finish talking for a second.
Yeah, right. That's what I was going to say. Finish up.
There, again, we've distributed special education on this floor. And then there's a fourth grade and a fifth grade. And the cool thing about fifth grade is we've taken the backside. This is kind of the VO model, but we've taken the backside and strung out the classrooms, which provides us the opportunity to have a green roof on the south side. It also provides us the opportunity for fifth grade to have an outdoor classroom. And fifth grade really is the grade, certainly in other schools, that's more likely to mimic a middle school curriculum, is more likely to have a true science-heavy kind of curriculum. And I think there's real opportunities here to do something pretty cool up in that sort of fifth grade suite. And we've also found in a lot of elementary schools that there's a desire to have fifth grade almost be its own academy, because they're changing. And I don't know if that'll be true here. We have to get into it with the district, but really kind of creating a fifth grade academy that's a little bit different and is more around circulating between classrooms, which is the middle school model. And we'll have to find out. But some of this is being done in anticipation of discussing things with the district, which we're really not going to get to till schematic design, just because of the limitation in time. But at least we have some ideas that we're putting together to share, I think. So with that, I will hand it off to
Chris and Brian. I don't know who raised first. So
Brian, I think, was ahead of me.
okay.
Yeah, this might be a dumb question on my part, but is the intention to have bathroom stalls in the kindergarten and pre-K rooms directly? That's why there's not the separate restrooms on the first floor?
Yes, and they're just not shown yet, but absolutely. Every one of those rooms has its own bathroom.
Okay, great, thank you.
I guess I got 3 things. So first is, and we didn't get to this, and that we had a great, I thought, sustainability subcommittee meeting earlier today from 2 to 4. We didn't really talk about vegetated roofs, but I'm happy to see this. I like the idea about incorporating an outdoor classroom. There will no doubt be folks who will be concerned about letting kids outside onto the roof of a building, but I'm sure there is a convincing and nuanced response to that. But that does seem pretty exciting. With respect to Charlie, I'd like you or Chris just to speak to that expansion concept up top. So it says 6 classrooms. So I'm assuming what that really means, it's 2 classrooms per floor. Would
Correct.
that be like would it be a single loaded corridor?
Yes.
And perhaps it's not a fair question yet. How do you envision the access working? For instance, do you lose the teacher planning room right there?
Correct.
Okay.
Teacher planning becomes a corridor.
Got it.
And then you have 2, and you're right, you have a single loaded corridor and you have 2 classrooms. And you also, and we don't have a note on it, but we will have a note on it, you could have 5 classroom expansion on this roof. So in theory, I mean, the school couldn't support it. I mean, I don't mean physically, I mean, I don't think the site nor the infrastructure could support it, but so you could in theory have 12 more classrooms here.
So this, I wanted to circle back then to the conversation we had. It was just at the last meeting or the meeting before last, when we talked about expansion at VO. There were two different expansion valves at VO. The first was the lower level, which we shelled out when we did the excavation. And within 2 years, we had actually gone in and done the fit up. So we picked up 3 classrooms plus some support space. To Charlie's point, there on the right, this is very much the opportunity we have at VO today. The third floor of VO is a single loaded corridor, sort of parallel to Johnson Road. If we wanted to, we could build out the third floor and pick up 6 classrooms. And the reason we can do that is we didn't do just, sheathing over light gauge. We actually have a structural concrete slab on the roof of the third, what is basically the top of the second floor and what those classrooms look out on. So structurally it works, but also TAP A actually included, the bathrooms are designed for that full build out. So the fixture, if you look at the bathrooms on the first and second floor, it's the same layout. The fire stairs, the egress was all designed to accommodate the full build out so that if and when the district decides to do it, it is a sort of limited project, if you will. So then I wanted to ask the question, Charlie, because you're only explicitly showing expansion there, kind of plan north, would your approach be to, for instance, have fixture counts in your plumbing work that would assume the 6 extra classrooms so that all you'd have to do is the 6 classrooms, right? We don't need to muck with fire stairs or anything like that. And if yes, then I'm assuming that second option you presented, which is where you have outdoor classrooms, you could put 6 classrooms there, but that's not something you're planning for in terms of just program space, to say nothing of structure, right?
I think structure we should do, and I think we should look at what the implications are for fire stairs and for bathrooms for a 12 classroom expansion and see what we come up with for numbers.
Okay. So
we haven't done that exercise yet.
Okay, I got it. And then my last question, can you go down to the first floor for a moment, Charlie? And so I look at music, and then if you go up 1 floor from there, go to the middle level for me. So at a recent meeting, and I may have misunderstood, were you saying your plan was to provide a taller ceiling height there for acoustic purposes, or did I misunderstand?
No, you did. You understood correctly, and that's the intent there. That about 2/3 of the room is open to above, and 1/3 of the room is 1 story. And I don't think we've fully developed that section with great care yet. But the idea would be we have some, you have instrument storage. Right now and it may come out of the program when we talk to the music folks. But right now there's like a small ensemble room, practice rooms. Those things don't need 2 stories.
Right.
Well, you don't even do 2 stories. You do 14 or 16 foot high ceilings. It's not like you're doing 28 foot high ceilings or something. But it's really a story and a third.
Right.
But
and so
I think we could create a nice north facing space that did have good acoustics in there.
And my last follow-up is, might there be an opportunity, Charlie, in what remains in what I might call that interstitial space for some building systems, something to support the building that maybe doesn't have to take up valuable square footage elsewhere? Or is that really to ask?
No, that's reasonable to ask. And I think we're starting to think about that in one, we've set ourselves up with some challenges that we may need to rethink in order to make the systems work, because right now we have. So one of the nice things about the kind of proposed system is it's not like you need the traditional giant boiler room,
right?
Because you have a bunch of different units all over the place, and that helps. However, we still are probably going to have a primary electric room. We're going to probably have a primary water service coming in. And one of the problems with putting all of that way over on the west is we have to then route all the way across to the east. And right now we actually haven't really even left ourselves with a reasonable path to do that. So I think one of the things we have to figure out, we may need to come across that lobby that we right now have as an open to below lobby just to figure that out. We also may decide, and I'm wondering about, is whether we end up trying to distribute some mechanical on all 3 floors on the first, second, and third floor of this area, kind of where the kitchen is and where the cafeteria and where the gym is. But that's something we need to sort out.
Great. All right, thank
we
you
have-
very much.
Frank and then Lisa. Frank?
Thanks, Jay. Charlie, can you go, I'm just going to ask you to go to the ground level first level. So from a drop-off entry, kids going up to their room, the stairwell, the main stairwell that they would take would be that on the left-hand side of admin, right? Okay.
Right there.
Okay. Can you go to the second level, please? One question, just in terms of the flexibility of the distribution of the classroom. So one thing I would just off the top of my head, and I know this is rough, but would we be able to think about first grade combining with second grade on the right-hand side, and then bringing third grade over toward the media center, or are we pretty, they're the same size classrooms, but I know we have one additional first grade in that cluster.
Yes, correct. If that's the desired outcome,
Maybe in
then
exchange with sped, maybe that sped room could go kick down into the.
yeah, well, that's not really a classroom size space. I mean, if that's the desired outcome, we'll figure out how to make
Okay.
it work. But this has been the age-old problem, which is we have the most program on the second floor. How do you get it to fit? And this was one way of getting it to fit. The other thing is, I thought we heard some anxiety about first grade being with an older grade. So our initial response, which may have been a faulty response, was, gee, maybe they should be their own grouping with their own bathrooms.
No, not faulty at all. I'm just trying to just see what kind of flexibility as we kind of work this through with staff, because one of the things I'm also thinking about is that library media center being right there. That means all the traffic's going to have to go by all those first grade classrooms to get there. So you've got, second and third grade trying to go down that hallway. So one, and someone's going to be there, right? Which I get. But then secondly, I got thinking about, would there be a way to leverage that that stairwell on the right-hand side, which would be directly above pre-K, presumably, right?
Yeah.
And just in terms of little ones, might we want to think about a separate entrance or some kind of way of kind of breaking that up a little bit? Just again, just off the top of my head. Can you go to the third level? So, okay. So one art room, which is on that third floor, right? So all third and second and third would be going, they would be accessing by going presumably down past those classrooms on the second floor and up that stairwell, right?
Well, the kids who were here could easily go up this stair.
Yeah, okay.
And then they would arrive here, and they'd have to go through fourth grade. I mean, the fact of the matter is, they're going to have to go past some kids are going to have to go past some other classrooms.
Got it. Yeah.
But
how does that work
the idea of having these three stairs is offers more vertical access.
Right, which is good. How does the extended learning spaces, which are kind of outreaching into the hallways, work with that with the transition piece? What's your experience with it? Everyone would be transitioning at the same time, so it wouldn't matter.
It's entirely up to how the teachers want to deploy these spaces. I mean, they're basically furnished and they're basically available.
Yeah.
So in other words, what we've seen, I think, and I'm not, we lay them out in consultation with districts, and then they use them however they're going to use them, and we're not there to monitor what they do. But the idea is they have the flexibility to come out there at any time, up at the teacher's discretion. In other words, to use those spaces. I don't think they ever treat them as you will have a period out there. Right. It's more like, you're working on a history project with Susie and Jimmy are both working on a history project. Go right outside the door. There's a table there, and work on it. Mm-hmm. And I can still see you through a window, and get some work done. Or I'm going to work with a small group, or there's a para who works with a small group, or
Okay.
And those people walk through. They're not, there's no way to
Right.
make them entirely separate.
No, understood.
And the diagramming that happened during the visioning, this was kind of not literally, but this was sort of the diagramming, which was two grades with a sort of space in between.
Yep.
It was kind of intended as this kind of flexible place for learning.
Yep. No, understood.
Lisa?
Yeah, just a quick question. Regarding the elevator, I know you said, I really want you to look into that, Charlie, where it's located, because being in the middle of a classroom to go up for a student with a disability into an area like that may cause more barriers, just because the person's going to have to maneuver in and out of that classroom in order to get to the other classrooms they need to learn in. So I don't know if that's the best place for the elevator. I'm just bringing it up, but if there could be another area that could be, so the student wouldn't have to go into a classroom, because that's how, so I don't know how you would do that.
Our idea there is that you enter the elevator from the corridor, you exit into the corridor, and you exit into the corridor. So
Okay.
the elevator would face the corridor.
Okay, so the student wouldn't have to go into the whole.
You'd arrive
Like
at
the
same,
library or
essentially you'd arrive in the same corridor as
Okay.
if somebody
All right.
who climbed the stair would, and you arrive at a very similar point.
Okay,
So there isn't, and we may slide the elevator over. I would just, what I was saying, it's not in a great spot. It was more about it fit as a physical thing. It was sort of breaking up rooms.
okay.
So, but the elevator itself would absolutely open into a corridor.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure of, just, that's what I was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Ethan?
Oh, hi, Charlie. I just have a question. We had this sustainability meeting this afternoon, and I guess the sensitive land use, I take those as buffer zones and whatnot. We already have a lowest grading of 1. So if you may go to the ground floor plan, just to get a sense, to make this work, I'm assuming, sort of the envisioned grade of 1 is given, thinking that, what sort of the impacted area that we are talking about. And if that number has to come up, with a thought in mind to protect those buffer zones and whatnot, what needs to be done differently? And I was a little bit concerned, continue to show the expansion also in the northern direction, as opposed to considering in other ways, So I'm just driving the question towards the grade of 1 being assigned with the scheme that we have in front, and what we need to do it differently so that we can be sensitive to protect those buffer zones and whatnot.
So the finished floor elevation is proposed at essentially a level that is very similar to what's out there right now.
Correct. So
and
to
then
make
that's
that
about 6 feet above the soccer field. So there will have to be grading around getting down and having accessible means down to the soccer field. But the rest of the site is going to be effectively level. And we're going to be digging into the hill a little bit on the west because that rises. And we're going to be filling a little bit to the east because that drops. So there's going to be a cut and a fill, but effectively the site is going to be generally pretty flat where the school is and where the outdoor play areas are and where the pickup and drop off is. And the only real grade differential will be between the building and the soccer field. And we want that anyway, because we're trying to maintain the soccer field grades and because that's where the floodplain is. And we want the grading to work on the south side because that's where all our pickup and drop off is in our play, in our play areas. But I think that the site will ultimately be relatively flat around the school.
Would you agree, Charlie? In my mind, where we are showing the OC is sort of like a deep valley tucked in between the field.
These are the OC means outdoor classroom.
Correct. That that area, perhaps it's much more, that's the 20 feet drop that we are talking about, correct? But
There's no
anyway,
20-foot drop. There's a 6-foot change in grade essentially between the soccer field elevation and where we're proposing the finished floor elevation.
yeah. But anyway, the elephant that sits in the middle is the one that we have the deep drop. So I was just trying to.
So there's a deep drop, one
Uh-huh.
spot where there's kind of almost like a kettle hole.
That's
It's right
it.
about
It doesn't
there.
extend
That's
all
going to
the
be a
way.
fill. That's going to be a fill condition.
So what is that driving that we are getting a grade of 1 in terms of that sensitive land use or whatnot? So what is that driving the grade to be 1 in the sustainability matrix? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, I can't speak to that. I mean, Colleen may be able to better than I. I don't know I don't know the details on that particular lead point.
Which sleep point were you talking about, Geetha?
Not sure.
Okay. Remember the first table that they had? And as far as, different,
The sensitive land protection credit?
yeah. I
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
sure what is that driving that thought.
So you get it easily by just redeveloping a site. If you have a greenfield site, which the site is not, you can't get it. So it doesn't have really anything to do with grade changes, wetland sensitivities, or building in the floodplain.
Chris, you have a question?
I do. And I'm sorry, it's a follow-up. Charlie, I'm assuming the life safety code is telling you that the stairs on the left and the right, those have to be enclosed, fire rated assemblies.
Yeah, but unfortunately, so far we think that.
So, well, that's okay. It sets my next question. The middle stair, do your travel distances tell you that really needs to be similarly constructed, or is there not the possibility for an open monumental stair, which
I really
sort of gets back to Frank's question, right, about what stair sort of feels central, what stair feels home, what stair feels welcoming for large groups of kids, and sort of naturally entices you to move up and down the building vertically.
So I want to have that chat with Cesar, our code guru, but his initial comment was you can't have 3 floors interconnecting and not have it enclosed. You can have 2 and have a monumental stair. So 2-story schools, as long as 50% are enclosed, the other ones can be monumental. But with 3 stories, I think we have a potential problem. But I want to explore that with him further. I mean, the other thing to do is put in glass, which is expensive, but you can do fire rated glass.
Okay.
Back.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Charlie, we pulled a trick on the King Open School in Cambridge to use fire shutters, very carefully located fire shutters to help resolve that issue of the monumental stair. But otherwise, as you said, there's no way to escape either using fire rated glass or
we're actually doing a school
stair
now.
tower.
We're doing a school now that actually, has fire shutters and then has the stair in the center of it, but it's like in a little room almost. It's got an end, 2 ends to it. And I haven't figured out how you'd have to create some kind of zone that, we'd have to figure that out. So this is awfully preliminary, and we're just fighting the clock in terms of, and we're just sharing these as we do them. I think we have a ways to go yet, but we're trying to at least figure out an organization. And I think as soon as we get into schematic design, we really have to sit down and have some very serious conversations with the district about how they want to teach and make sure this supports that. And if not, we need to change what we need to change. But you also have this problem with a 3-story school is how to organize it, right? But what we're trying to do is create that zone at the end that allows for public use. If you put doors, if you have the elevator available and the stair available, and you can close the rest of the school off, you could literally have a visitor come in, in the evening or the weekend and use the gym because it's adult basketball, or use the CAF because there's a jewelry fair, or go upstairs and use the media center, or go all the way upstairs and use STEAM and art. And the only trick there, of course, is you always have to have two means, so it can't just be the one stair. So you end up with an alarmed door, but as long as you get a big sign on it that says this door is alarmed, don't go through it. We ought to be able to organize the school so you could really have this kind of hub around this lobby.
And Charlie, that's kind of where I was going on the monumental stair idea, is that if
this stair wants to be a monumental stair.
Which one? Yeah.
The one, the one in the main lobby wants to be a really nice, elegant, open stair that's welcoming.
I totally agree with you. And to the point you just made, there may be some shared, common public space that's above, but I'm hard pressed to imagine the need or demand for it on the third floor. But I can certainly envision something on the second floor. So I think there may be something natural about the open monumental stair that only connects 2 floors, and then we're connecting from 2 to 3 by different means, and it's rated assembly.
Well, that's a nice idea, and that may be very well be worth exploring. The idea that you transfer from one stair to the other if you're going to the third floor.
Yeah.
Which, as long as it's really easy to do, shouldn't be a big drama for a student.
All right, Frank, and then Brian.
Brian, go ahead.
Okay.
So this is just building off of Frank's comment. I hadn't really thought about it or noticed it before, and then this is more a comment than any sort of proposed solution to it. But those first graders are going to have a lot of traffic by their room. Every time second and third grade goes anywhere, because all the shared spaces are on the left side, they end up with the foot traffic by their, through that corridor. I don't know what can be done to mitigate that at all. It's sort of a reality of having the building configured as it is, but it's something to maybe think more about.
Right. Again, we were responding to what we thought we heard, but we could certainly rethink it if that.
No, I think it's consistent with what you heard, Charlie. Just as a follow-up to Brian, I knew he was going to go there with that. So I know that there's severe limitations to what you can do. And I know we're trying to create that public access, but it's a school for kids first. So it would be nice, and it's probably not doable, if there was a way to more centrally locate something of the common core spaces, like, for example, the media center, so that it would be somewhere in the middle of the building, either on the first floor or second floor, just so it's not every single space that kids need to go to if they're on the right-hand side of the building has to be all the way on the other side or up or down a vertical. And so it's just a comment. I mean, I have no clue. It's probably not doable. It's funny because I'm looking at the potential expansion area and I keep thinking to myself, oh, I just wish that was part of the actual design right now. Like having something that goes off that back that is a core space for kids that could have windows that open up to that back area. That's a learning space. Just seems like it would create a nice space. And I don't know. I'm obviously seeing this for the first time, and I'm not forming my thoughts well. But so I'll shut up. But I just wanted to kind of throw out there whether or not there, just as an idea, if there's a way to kind of break the core spaces up a little bit more, and not necessarily have to have all of them on that left side, but it may not be doable.
Well, I think the media center on the second floor isn't on the second floor. I'm not talking about location horizontally. Vertically on the second floor is not a bad outcome because that's the center of the building vertically. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I don't disagree.
But
it would also be nice coming off the back of that building. Just saying. I'm going to lower my hand also and now mute.
Well, we can try to change where it's located and try to change where first grade is located. But the other question is there a desire to have first grade with second grade and third grade by itself? Which is another difficult thing to accomplish with this plan, but.
Well, I think I'm responding more to what Brian said, is just that the traffic for first grade kids, I mean, they're pretty distractible as it is. And I would just be, I mean, someone's going to be there, and I would just think, wondering whether, I mean, I think older kids could probably handle that distraction a little bit. I don't even know how much of a distraction it would be, but generally, if there's any space in the building that teachers would be sending kids down to during the middle of a class period, it would be the media center.
Well, it's all about second and third grade, because any other grade can use this other stair. And so it's about that this hallway, this floor and this hallway.
Right. And that's why I was thinking about if it were in the middle, and again, probably not possible because I know how tight this site is, and you don't have room on either end to spread this building out. If it were more in the middle, then both of those wings could access it without having to, it'd just be closer.
I hear you.
Okay.
I mean, I don't generally, yeah, okay, I'm just.
How is it at VO right now? Do we all, there is a public space that you can go through and block off all the classrooms. Do you enter the media center right there also?
I'm actually bringing, Jay, I'm in the process of bringing that up in about, give me like 90 seconds.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Well, let me do this if I can. So Brian and I are both Morocco parents. And so I'll throw this up. This is from the master plan. So one of the beauties of the reason why you avoid the distraction at Morocco is it's a racetrack plan. So here you have the central circulation, and then adjacent to that, you have the vestibules with cubbies, you have storage, you have bathrooms, right? So the kids are just physically, most of them, actually all of them are really significantly removed from the corridor, because even this classroom, for example, has a door that's over here off the vestibule. So you kind of have these degrees of separation, if that makes sense. If I go to VO, and I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment so I can find it and not give everybody a headache. So let me get there. VO strikes me as a very similar arrangement to what Charlie is sharing. If anything, it's sort of an inverse. And I actually do have an early schematic of VO. I may just go to, I'm going to do that because I can get to that a little more quickly. Here, I found it. This is from, so this is from these are earlier presentations to town meeting that I think you guys have seen. Let me just go to, I'll blow this up a little bit. There you go. So these were early schematic, kind of at the stage we're working at now. So this was an add reno option on the left. And the option on the right is really what VO became, although it's more of a curved solution than what you see here. And you see here on the left, this is a simple double loaded corridor with classrooms, much as we have today. You have this main entrance at this kind of knuckle. And then here you have the bolus of the assembly spaces, the cafeteria, you have the gym at the back, there's a library media center upstairs. And so really, as any of the grade levels are coming and going down this corridor, whether it's to lunch or library or the gym, they're inevitably passing their peers. And that's sort of one of the, I might call it an inescapable truth of this idea of the double loaded corridor, 3-story building with all the assembly stuff at one end and classrooms at the other. So it's kind of, I mean, I think one could sort of you could move a piece of this puzzle, but you sort of then create another issue with another one. I'm not sure there's an easy solution without kind of fundamentally changing the arrangement, but I should let the actual architect react to that. What does Charlie think? You're brooding.
Well, I'm just thinking, as is always the case with these things, there is no perfect solution, right? And so it's a question about what the priorities end up being. I mean, most districts we find have an interest in having the media center available as kind of a public space off a lobby, kind of a sort of something that can be used. We've heard interest in that all the way through the process. We can try to move it somewhere in the middle of the building and that opportunity is lost, and that's fine because that's a trade-off. I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. It's a question of picking what to do. Or we could possibly try, although I don't know how to do it, switching first grade all the way to the end and teaming first and second grade and giving third grade the area near the media center. So those seem like the two strategies. Or we could leave it the way we have it. And the way we have it, as I said, was in reaction to what we heard. So, it's a question of prioritizing what is most critical, I guess. I think there's also, media is a big piece and it actually fits on top of administration pretty well, which also was a benefit to us in terms of the site plan and the planning of it in terms of how to organize the building. We certainly don't have any other big equivalent size program space to put this thing on top of somewhere else. So there's some logic to where we put it.
Geetha had a question also, and then Brian.
So, hold on. Oh, I'm not muted. Just where's the main entrance to the school? I thought in the middle. I was listening, and I thought, isn't it going to be at the back of the school?
The assumption is that the left-hand entrance is the main entrance for most students, that the right-hand entrance is a dedicated early learning entrance for pre-K.
Charlie, you may want to bring your plan back up again and reshare.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. We stopped sharing. Forgive me. Okay, let's try that again. Sorry. So you see that? You look at that? Okay.
It's not up yet.
It's not?
Oh, okay.
No,
So
we're looking at that.
when the kids being dropped off, when you had the first floor plan, Charlie.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so it's the student, the main entrance we assume is this one. It's on the left with a control point with administration. However, there's a dedicated pre-K entrance to the right with a pre-K administration with a control point there as well for the younger students. That was the thought.
So during the daytime, if the visitor comes in, if the school is locked from the admin, they can see the main entrance to let them in. Would that work?
A visitor would presumably come in the main entrance, yes.
All right. And in the morning drop-off, students would have the opportunity to enter from the OC entrance as well. Would that be open too? That's how I heard, and I was.
Oh, no, I don't think these back entrances would be open unless, the school could choose to have them open. I mean, it would be a department. That would be sort of a district decision. And often those entrances, if they're sort of back entrances or side entrances, end up needing to be staffed. Because there's no kind of access control at those entrances, and then you get into the whole issue of is there somebody available to do that, et cetera, et cetera. But presumably, a vast majority of students. I mean, bike racks are going to be on the south side. Sidewalks of the streets are on the south side. All the pickup drop-offs on the south side. So you anticipate most of the students would come in from the south.
Okay, maybe last comment. I do like the idea of keeping the media room, everything together with the gym. Is there an option to swap the staircase and reduce the traffic? And that's the question that I had for all the concern of the first grade distractions and whatnot.
Well, so again, I think that anybody on the top floor or the bottom floor could easily use the stair in front of the media center to arrive at the media center. I think the issue is really 2 and 3. Those are the students who would walk right down that hallway. if we had more width, we might be able to do something more like the Morocco, where we had a kind of sort of quad, neighborhoods of classrooms and then a corridor that went past it. But I just don't think we have the width here. I mean, we're just right up against it in every direction. We just did a school with an extremely wide floor plate, but it's because we had a lot of area, and it allowed us to do some very different sort of configuring of the space. But this one, there's just not a lot of room.
Brian?
Yeah, the site constraints are very difficult on the site, obviously, and I wasn't necessarily proposing radical redesign. I actually think to mitigate some of my concern, there's maybe operational solutions to help the traffic in front of first grade, but I think it is just being aware of or thinking about as we tweak and push and pull that second, third grade could deliberately take the stairs down and go through pre-K and K on their way to lunch instead of just making sure every time they're not traipsing through the first grade area and making that the highest traffic area of the school. There's multiple solutions. I just thought it was something we should be aware of and think about.
Yeah.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that conversation about the traffic. I mean, I think there are a number of architectural levers that can be pulled. One of them is the openness of the classroom to the corridor. So the amount of visual connectivity. And as an Ambrose parent, one of the things about the entrance to Ambrose is once you include corridor width, plus the depth of the lockers, plus the plus the kind of alcove that each classroom entry is in, they actually feel kind of like their own private world anyway. There's not a huge amount of visual distraction from corridor to classroom and vice versa. So I think that's a lever, or a dial, I guess, that Tepe can turn, is the amount of openness. And even if that's used for extended learning, it's probably something that happens sort of in the middle of a class session when things are more fluid. And at the beginning and in the end, it's probably much more structured generally, getting the kids in, getting the kids out. And so at the times of highest traffic, it's probably the least occupied. So I'm not super worried about that, but I also recognize that when the center of gravity of the building on the upper floors is at the center zone, and the center of gravity at the first floor is at the left zone, there is this moment of transition at level 2 between the left stair and the center stair, if there is one, that gets you up to the levels above. And I think that's just an interesting challenge. And I'm sure Charlie and his team will figure out a way to help create a kind of believable and a believable flow, but also one that sort of encourages the kind of casual interactions that we're looking for without the distractions that I think we're trying to avoid. So it definitely feels like a schematic design challenge.
Yeah, well, that's an insightful set of commentary, and it's really worth exploring because the fact of the matter is this extended learning box where my cursor is huge. I mean, it's really wide. And if, for instance, we said, you know what, we're going to have cubbies or lockers, and they're going to be out here somewhere in the middle on each side, and they're going to be tall, not low. And we're going to create sort of a zone, in this particular community of classrooms, we're going to create sort of a through space, and then we're going to give these two sides their own sort of 2 classroom extended learning zones instead of 1 big learning zone, something like that. We might be able to rethink how that works. And I will say that these extended learning zones seem to get deployed more and more and more the older and older the students are, because as they become more independent learners, and it's because they're given more independence outside of the classroom, they tend to go out there more. So first grade may be one of the grades where that will be used less anyway. So it may be that we could repurpose what we're calling extended learning right now, which is entirely generic terminology, into something that kind of breaks up that center zone in terms of study versus transportation versus cubbies versus the like. So that is a very thoughtful observation.
Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, and I had a bad connection there, so maybe Mark was just saying this and I lost it in the breakup, but a sense of scale I think would be helpful. I was also going to suggest, Charlie, I think it could be helpful if you added door swings. And
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And you actually, and you indicated, for instance, I wonder if you took a poll right now, how do most people on the committee presume these classrooms are even being oriented? In other words, in that first grade classroom across from SPED, Charlie, do you imagine that the kids are facing left and or right? Or are they focused more longitudinally? Where's the head of the classroom? Is it on the long wall or the short wall? And
what typically ends up happening is these long walls end up being the teaching walls because there's more room for teaching. And the end walls are obviously window walls, and the corridor walls tend to have doors and the like. One of the things we're finding, this classrooms are so much more focused on mobility now. We just did a school where all the flat screen televisions were mobile, right? So they weren't mounted to the wall anymore. They're on wheels, so that a teacher can move them around and have a small group session with the flat screen interactive television, or they can put it in the middle of the room. And is much, more and more we see classroom environments supporting small group work. So it isn't quite the traditional classroom, but it'll be the long walls that end up being those teaching walls.
And so I appreciate that. So the reason that I brought that up, for instance, if you just move your cursor ever so slightly a little further into that corner, sort of there you go, right there. That could actually be the door into that first grade room on the left, or it could be a door swing off the main corridor. And whichever it is may have a substantial effect on, let's say, how distracted a student might or might not be if there's a lot of traffic in the hallway, right? So I think it would be helpful if you could show, and I know you get to it eventually, some ideas about how these rooms are oriented. Where's the teacher? Which direction are the students facing? Where are the door swings? What are your thoughts about, how opaque or transparent the wall is? Windows or not? Is it clear story, or is it coming down lower in the hallway? I think it would be much easier then for you to be in a position to react to, concerns about the traffic being a distraction, because it might actually be a non-issue given a little more visual cues. I mean, meaning to us, I'm saying.
Yes, no, absolutely. And in these plans, that's the next step. And we were hoping to get to it today, and we didn't, which was to start showing doors and furniture, and we just didn't get there.
I imagine it's actually a grade to grade thing too. Like the way you envision the relationship between extended learning in a fifth grade classroom may be quite different than the way you envision it between a first grade classroom.
I would defer to the educators in Winchester for that. But yes, as I said, presumably the older the student, the more likely you see those extended learning zones being deployed for small group and independent work, because the younger the kids, they're less likely to be out there with a teacher in the classroom and the student in the hall, right? And it's more likely the older they get that they're more likely to be doing independent work out there. So it is true, I think, the younger grade. And in fact, we don't usually do big old extended learning, and we haven't shown it here. We don't usually do big old extended learning zones with K and pre-K, because their classrooms serve as, that function.
Last question, Chris. Charlie, could the expansion be taught on the south side as opposed to on the north side, at least in the conceptual wise? Just wondering.
There's not a whole lot of room for it, but we could.
I'm saying it will be future down the road, right? Yeah, it won't be right away, so we don't need a separation between the existing school. We have a pristine ground also. That's another factor. We don't need to do anything.
The fact of the matter is, however, we have a lot of site planning around around parking and pickup and drop off and the like, which makes the idea of putting an addition out in front difficult. I don't know quite what a desirable outcome would be for classrooms on the south side.
I pretty much envision the north side is big of a trouble to get it prepped. That's my concern. It's just the south side is much less of a work.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, to Gita's question, and then also to some previous comments that have been made by Frank and Chris, and also Charlie tonight. I think probably the plan is that everything to the outer curb boundary of the service road on the north side are going to be part of the construction prep for the building.
Correct.
So if we've got that all like good to go, we're using structural fill, we're like already, everything's good, drainage is good, then anything we do within that boundary, I think is clean as long as we plan for it. And so if we have an expansion to the north, great. If we have an expansion on the third floor, great. From what I've heard already, it sounds like the school actually probably couldn't, at least according to the current model, handle a full like 12 classroom expansion. It would ultimately, I think, exceed the size of school that Frank feels is the optimum size for the school. So it probably feels like one or the other of these two things will happen. There's either an expansion to the north or there's an expansion on the third floor. And I think it's reasonable to have at least two means to expand the building in the future, to give whatever future school committee and whatever future architect and whatever future EFPBC, give them some options to work with. But it feels to me like, at least the way they have it designed and the way that they've sort of, dashed the outline in, either of those two options could be achievable, and achievable within the scope of work that's already been defined for this project from a kind of future planning standpoint. So I don't know if that allays some of your concerns, Gita, about the prep for that future expansion, but I think it seems like a reasonable proposition. If that's something we want to plan for, it's something that we definitely could plan for right now within the site boundary of the project in either of these two conditions.
And at this point, Mark, I just want to say nothing because we haven't crossed the chain link to know what's in that ground. So site prep on with the sensitive soil and bringing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I imagine if we needed that, this would be, replace with suitable fill.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. It's just just the thought, pushing it a little further. Not with the notion of you going with the expansion right away. I mean, that's not a good thought anyway, in my mind. We just do all the numbers and crunch it and build it. But even with that, it's like, why not be pushed to consider on the south side? That's my thought. But because
Can I say I really appreciate the way Mark, though, framed his comment, because although VO had two means of expansion and we've already opted on the smaller one, and yes, you could add 5 or 6 classrooms on the third floor, we're still expanding what was back in 2011, a considerably smaller building than what we're looking at on screen tonight. So VO opened with a design enrollment of 420. That's at least 100 kids less than what we're looking at right now. So just that 6 classroom expansion on the back that Charlie showed, that's 120 kids just on top of what we're looking in the base. So there really is, to Mark's point, there is a point at which, prior school committees have said, we only want our neighborhood schools to get so big before we start thinking about building a sixth neighborhood elementary school. Or my personal opinion is, before we would do something really grand here about expanding Lynch, we have to seriously look at the third floor of VO. The master plan says the modulars back at Ambrose, those two modulars, they go away. We do a 3-story addition there. If we want to, we could add 3 or 6 classrooms. In other words, we can grow buildings more equitably throughout town if we need to. I think other feet would have to fall before we would do something that big here.
Frank, did you still have a question? I saw your hand earlier.
No, I'm all set. Thanks, Jay.
Okay.
Jay, I know Charlie wanted to talk about phasing and logistics too, so I just want to be mindful on time.
Can I make one last comment just about future expansion? To Chris's earlier anecdotes about VO, and to Frank's comments about kind of, reaching a maximum size for the school. If we were really pressed on this school and we felt like there was a high degree of certainty that this school would immediately initiate an expansion plan, I would absolutely think that we as a group should consider what that would mean and whether or not we would just build out the third floor with shelf space as the baseline condition for the project. If we were really that close to doing it, rather than having a whole new project, have it be a summer slammer that you fit out shelf space instead of doing like a real serious close the school kind of construction project. I mean, I have absolutely no idea whether we're there or not, but I just wanted to put that out there. If we are there, we should plan for it now if we can, because shelf space is actually not that expensive. And it's a lot less expensive than tearing down an existing facade, building a new facade, building a new roof, and doing all the mechanicals and so forth.
Definitely. That's a good point.
The good news is Frank Hackett can tell you exactly how many kids are going to be here in 5 years, right, Frank?
My conscience is not right to immediately think build out. I think we have learned a lesson and we have to predict better, I guess, I don't know.
I was only slightly sarcastic. So Geeta, I mean, as Frank has just recently been sharing, it's a couple of recent school meetings. Enrollment has gone down over the past couple of years. Clearly, in large part because of COVID, we did not have as many kids come back as we thought we would, although Lynch's enrollment still remains pretty high and is only like 4.5% off the high watermark over the last 10 years, for crying out loud. So, and this is the Lynch district in particular, we have to remember, has the highest concentration of rental properties, which tend to see a lot of turnover, younger kids. We've got housing developments that are certainly underway. So Frank has certainly indicated that we can expect some additional kids coming from housing development. On the other hand, we've shared all that with the MSBA. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they ultimately decided to increase the design enrollment. So they've sort of accounted for some of that. So at least a good chunk of it is baked in, we believe.
All right. Can we move on to the phasing and logistics?
Sure. And a final comment on expansion and the like. You can pull your hair out about expansion, but you don't know what the future is. But frankly, you could get rid of 2 pre-K classrooms and put a big addition on top of pre-K play in the future. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting any number of outcomes here. You just would have to figure it out. All we can do right now is put in dashed lines and say, well, there are possibilities. And we just picked one that we thought was less intrusive, but it could go either direction. Phasing. So this is an important topic. It really impacts a lot of issues, and it should not be ignored. This is what we have right now, we think, out there for parking, and this may not be precisely right, but this was what the landscape architect came up with, which is about 90 spaces. So you got 32 spaces in the big parking lot to the left. You've got the 19 spaces over by the brook. And then you have 16 spaces plus its service, and then you have some other ones sort of scattered around. And there may be some other, somebody may say, oh, I always park somewhere where you haven't even shown. So this may not be precisely right, but it's a guesstimate of how many spaces are out there. So we're working under the assumption we have about 90 spaces, that they are fully deployed and utilized. And what we've heard is it's not enough spaces. So that's what we're using as our working assumption today. Our proposal for planning on how to build this replacement building is 3 phases. In our first phase, we're saying you keep the bus loop that you have now and use it for buses. You abandon the car loop that's on the east side and reconfigure a much smaller loop that essentially will accommodate an SUV, but it would never accommodate a bus. It would never accommodate any sort of truck. And you still deliver students to the front of the school during construction. Furthermore, you build a parking lot over here to the left, which we show in the site plan as a final configuration, but it's not available to the school for parking. It's available to the contractor for laydown space. So really, when you look at this exercise for construction, you lose everything except for 16 spaces in service and about 19 spaces over here by the brook. So the presumption is that you really can't run the school with, 35, less than 35 parking spaces. So what our premise is you remove the end of the school, which we're saying is essentially 2 grades, which we would go to, there's 2 stories here. We'd go to the foundation wall of the basement. So it would continue to act as a retaining wall. But we would remove the end classrooms in order to construct more parking spaces so the school could function reasonably during the construction period. But this first phase, the available spaces would be around 16 plus 32 plus 16, which gives us something like 60 spaces combined, while the contractor is abating and taking off the end of the building and creating a temporary lot, while they are probably off hours building this temporary loop, which shouldn't be a big drama because a lot of this is already paved. You can use the roadway that comes in. You just have to reconfigure the loop. And while you create essentially a new temporary walkway that comes up and gets you to the 2 entrances. So this first phase would be a enabling and preliminary demolition phase. The issue with it is it would probably have to happen in the fall in order to be in anticipation of starting construction in the winter. One of the concerns, of course, is that we get into the fall, we get to where asphalt plants close and all of a sudden you can't pave. So there's this small window. And that's why we think probably students could not, the 2 grades could not be on site at the beginning of the school year if we were going to try to make this work. The second phase would be construction of a new building, which is right there, which is our N5. So that essentially creates a construction fence that that takes the existing parking spaces on the east side of the site, but avoids the existing roadway, avoids this smaller 50-foot radius turnaround, comes across the play area, cuts the play area in half, avoids the existing bus loop, and goes all the way out to as far as we can go over here and creates this new basically lay down area for the contractor, as well as a gate for the contractor as far up the access road as we can get and still be on our own property, and limits encroachment as best we can on the soccer fields. And we think that the best way to do a temporary path to the fields, there is an old roadway that loops around to the east. And we would suggest that you would use that for public access to the soccer fields for the 2 years of construction, and creates 35 new parking spaces to the east. And those are piggybacked on the existing one. There's one, as you all know, there's one existing row of parking. This would be 3 rows of parking. We'd have to do angle parking to make it work. But then you'd have 35 plus 16, which basically gives you 50 spaces really for the duration of construction. 50 spaces sounds like it might barely cover your staff. It does not really accommodate much in the way of visitor. And it would be the reality of a site under construction. And we think that this could just barely work. We have a compromised play area. Obviously, I think if we moved this fence a little bit, we kind of need to give the contractor at least 20 feet or so to make this work inside between the building and the construction enclosure. They can't even get around, they can't get around the staging they need to set up. So we usually use 20 feet as a bare minimum for clearance. I think we're too close right here, right now, but I think we could sort that out. We may be able to angle this a little bit and give some play area, but I think it might be a best case scenario is 2/3 of what's out there now. But we still get 2 entrances, one at the gym, the main entrance at admin. We get a safe zone for students to get picked up and dropped off from. We get a pathway that leads to this enhanced parking over here. We still have some service parking that presumably would have to be used both by staff and by teachers and staff over here as well. And then if 50 was not enough, there'd have to be provisions made for on-street parking or off-site parking and vans or whatever, which we've talked about. Are there other ways of limiting parking on site during the construction period? And then, of course, the whole topic of you can't expect to have the school play here. You can't expect to have in-person teacher-parent conferences necessarily. I mean, it's impossible with such a limitation on parking. However, we think it's doable with 50 parking spaces if everyone buys into that concept. So that's phase 2, and that's a 1.5 years. And then phase 3 is really, this is often the most difficult phase, interestingly, because you're opening a new building and you think, oh, great, we survived construction. We've got this brand new building to move into. But the fact of the matter is you still have another building on site being torn down. So you have a lot of the same problems. At that point, we can keep our existing old bus loop. We can begin to deploy our brand new parking space to the west. And we can continue to use some portion of the temporary, quote unquote, parking area to the east, while the contractor abates and takes down the existing school and hopefully can use the Brantwood Avenue curb cut for bringing in, well, not bringing in any material, for taking away the existing building. And then once they've done that, they are then executing all of the site work that needs to be executed. And that would be during the school year. And you guys have been through this, so you know the drill. During the school year in the fall of 2025, after school opens, the kiddos, at that point, at least the kids can play on the soccer field, which is great. So they have somewhere to go. They're not many play structures yet. With sort of the pedestrian zone, right, probably all temporary, but the pedestrian zone in front of the building tying together these 2 pickup and drop off zones for the kids. And then the contractors doing the site work. And hopefully, if they're competent, they have a vast majority of it done by, November of 25. And if they get behind, it ends up going into the spring of 26. And we've certainly seen situations where contractors have said, sorry, we can't, we're going to get you a binder course, but we can't get you a finished course of pavement because we don't have time, the asphalt plants, and you're not going to have, temporary striping, the asphalt plants are closing, or there's no way we can seed in the fall, is too late, and we can't plant trees, we'll come back in the spring. And I think that has to be anticipated. But theoretically, they can get the building abated and down during that summer. They can start on your demo the day school ends, essentially, well, as soon as everything's out of the building, but relatively soon, early in June. So that gives them June, July, August, September, October, November, 6 months to get this thing down and get the site work done. So that's the last phase. And there's about 50 spaces available during that third phase. So that's what our idea is. And there's lots of hands up.
Yeah, we have Mark, Meg, and then
People
Colleen.
panic when they look at this thing.
Mark, you want to lead off?
I think this is great, and you've identified the problems. And I don't know exactly how a solution is reached, but it feels to me like the issues at hand here are, one, the relocation of 2 grades of school during construction, or the relocation of the entire school. Either of those seem like they're potential options. And the cost of that, and the both financially and emotionally for parents of the school. The construction costs in any configuration of, for example, in the phasing that you have shown, the use of an extremely limited, tight site with very little laydown area, a tight boundary around the building for the use, for scaffolding, truck traffic, cranes, and so forth, because undoubtedly there's a construction cost to that. Then the community's openness to the use of Horn Pond Brook Road or Brantwood for parking, and any appetite for one-directional access to the school during construction. And then I guess the fifth thing is the number of parking spots that feel like they're required on site during construction. And I don't know enough about the dynamics of like the community there, the staff and faculty, access to the roadway, the appetite for the town to take on additional cost relative to the increased burden on the neighbors for things like parking on local streets that aren't typically places for people to park. But all of those feel like they're different measures that, depending on what I heard about each of those different priorities, I would make a recommendation maybe in a different way about how to proceed on the project. And I don't know enough about it, but those are the things that I see as the potential issues and the potential things for us as a group, and then us as a community more broadly to consider as we look to making decisions about what the best approach to phasing for the project is.
Meg?
Okay, so I had one question, and well, really 2 questions. So Charlie, if all the children were going to be off the site, would you phase this differently? Would you knock the building down first and then build still in the same location? And then I would strongly recommend during phase 2, I really think we need to use more of the field space for a laydown area. I think you can encroach onto the field space and use it for, temporary parking for the contractors, maybe allowing that contractor laydown area that's showing in your plan for staff parking, and then the construction project goes into the field a little bit more. We have to work on access, but I think that might free up a little bit of space.
That so that's fine. That's really a conversation for Winchester to have around loss of field space for 2 plus. It's not 2 years either. It's 3+ years, because once it has to get restored, and then you have whatever you have 2-3 growing seasons before you can play on it. So that's above my pay grade. It certainly would help the contractor out. They'd go down and put a big temporary gravel pad down there that they took up later. They would, I mean, we just did this. It was Danvers, and they had a full-size youth soccer field. And they just said to their youth soccer program, "You're losing this field for 4 years or 3 years." And they said, "Okay." And the contractor used it for everything. They used it for trailers. They used it for parking. They used it for material storage. And then at the end, they restored it and they actually sodded the field.
Yeah.
So that they get it sooner, but there's a cost to that, of course, too. And then, so that'd be great. We could move this orange line north. We're into the floodplain, which means we have to get some permissions for that. We've been trying to stay out of the floodplain, but that would be a temporary measure, hopefully. And the only thing about using this gray box to the left for staff is you get this problem of crossing. See, the advantage of getting the contractor entrance as far to the west as possible is that other than pick up and drop off moments when you just have to have blackouts and the contractor's not allowed on to drive on site, they get on and off the site at the very far end. If we give this, then we're bringing the contractor farther in and crossing, at which point any staff member has to go across construction traffic. So it's doable, and we can talk about it. It's a little bit more complicated. And then the final question, what would we do if students were all off site? We'd do it as a single phase. We'd give the contractor the site and we'd say, take the building down and build a new building and go nuts. And we don't care how you do it, when you do it, just get it done. We wouldn't prescribe, I don't think we'd do much in the way of prescribing
the phasing,
the sequencing. We would just tell them they had to do it, right?
Do you think it would
probably start with abatement and demolition at the same time they started with excavation and foundations, is my guess, because they'd want to do it all in parallel.
Do you think that would shorten the overall duration?
I don't think it would shorten the duration too much, but yes, I think it would probably mean they could be maybe done by September of 25 instead of being done, but I don't know that they could build a new building any faster, but I think they could get the demolition and the site work done during the same time they were building the new building so that they could be pretty much gone by September of 25 instead of still hanging around in November or December or April, May, June of 26. I think that would be the difference.
Yeah, thank you.
Pauline?
So I just had a quick question on phase 2. If you are assuming, I think it's 5 months, can't quite see if what percentage of that or how many months would be taking down the building? Could that be June through September?
Phase 3?
Oh, yes.
Taking down the end of the building or the whole building?
The whole building.
So that's phase 3.
Phase 3.
We are assuming that would be June of 2025 through this whole zone. We think is June of 25 through at least, and that's what I'm saying, at least Thanksgiving of 25.
Okay.
And I also think there's a possibility that there would still be work to do in the spring of 26, depending on how well or badly they did taking the building down and doing the site work.
We know there's going to be asbestos. We know there's going to be lead.
Oh yeah, no. The abatement is a known commodity, and it's baked into the estimating we're doing because we've already done the study on it, and there's $1 million+ worth of abatement.
I'm just worried about like the exposure.
I think
it has to be.
If the entire building is less of a concern, the phase 1 might be something that was of more concern to the community, because phase 1 we're proposing to do while the students are in school.
Mm-hmm.
But it is fully, it's fully enclosed. There would be air barriers. We've certainly seen it done. Anytime you do a phase construction of that type, that's something that ends up happening. So it's just a question of whether there's so much concern that it's an unacceptable risk or whether people find it to be an acceptable strategy. Certainly other districts have gone ahead and done it, but I know there's a lot of sensitivity around it.
Okay.
Chris?
just one comment on parking, and then I want to go back to a little bit of discussion about swing space. So one of your earlier site aerial photos, Charlie, even showed the number of cars that are parked there on the street, plan right. Parent, yeah, there you go.
Yes.
So parents, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parking along the street there, along the brook. If you look to the right, both for pickup and drop off, I think we probably do have teachers and staff that park there. We have teachers and staff at the Lincoln Elementary School. A substantial, I mean, virtually all the parking for teachers and staff at Lincoln is street parking. So I would have to assume the town would work with us if we needed to, designate some of those spaces if they're necessary. But certainly, we don't seem to have the capacity for, parents and visitors that you described. I wonder if you can go back for a moment, Charlie, to one of those phasing slides for a moment. I just want to acknowledge that the discussion we've had up to this point is, here's what we can do if we get 2 grade levels offsite. And up to this point, we've said, that we assume that means 8 classrooms. So what we haven't quite talked about is, so where would they go? And I want to acknowledge that, as I think the committee is aware, town meeting funded at a DD level this idea of moving central office to the carriage house with the express purpose then of freeing up the top floor of Parkhurst, which has something like 12 classrooms-ish. I mean, our expectation is Parkhurst, and is Charlie actually going to go to a slide that has it? And I didn't know he was going, oh, there it is. So, well, there we go. So the question, I'll ask this then sort of quickly is, regardless of how swing space should be accommodated, whether it be at Parkhurst or if, let's say, Charlie and his team feels like, well, you could do it by the skin of your teeth moving 2 grade levels. Boy, wouldn't it be easier if you moved 3? And then we'd find, well, we don't really have space for 3 grade levels at Parkhurst. We might need to bring on, 4 modular classrooms and squeeze them in there next to the existing modulars. Whatever that solution may be, and I think it'll come into focus pretty quickly. My question, Charlie, is we've talked about a fall town meeting project funding agreement that then frames a debt exclusion override in January. Do you have any thoughts about the value of us actually pushing to fund something that supports the swing space solution as early as this spring town meeting? Meaning, that would fund the design work and any construction dollars spent that would free up your team to be able to sort of get going on that. And I pose that as a question only because the MSBA does not reimburse for swing space. So it's entirely on us anyway to pay for it. And it strikes me that if once we develop an option for swing space, that if we wait and we roll it into the project funding agreement, then we're waiting until January of 23 to even get started on the design work. And, as we know, the longer we wait, the more expensive things become. If we did something like that, we can control that sort of, it seems to me, that essential early enabling part of the project. And then helpfully on the backside, it actually lowers the overall project cost that goes out to the voters in the debt exclusion override. But Charlie, what do you think just in terms of timing? Because the money at the end of the day has to, the question goes before town meeting 2 times a year.
So that initial phase, what we're calling our phase 1, which is to take off the end of the existing lynch, we think would have to happen in the fall of 23 in order to have a contractor start on our phase 2, essentially by January of 24, to give them a fighting chance of getting this whole thing done. So that means we think your 2 grades would have to be not come back to school on September 1st of 2023. So that means,
which by the way, Frank has said that's his preference, right? So Dr.
Right.
Hackett has said he'd rather not disturb the school year. So I might have asked my question in a clumsy way.
So no,
you have more.
I'm working
confidence.
backwards.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we say our kids have to be off by September 1st of 23, then that means the Parkhurst has to be available to them or some other solution by September 1 of 23. So if it were the Parkhurst, then you would presume the Parkhurst needs at least some preparation to accommodate students in September 1st of 23. Whether that's a complicated project or a modest project is still, I mean, even if the town could do it with their own forces, and even if we needed to just move in some furniture and slap a coat of paint on it, and I think my impression is it might be more than that. There are temporary walls in there, there are partitions in there, et cetera, et cetera. But even if it was very simple, you need, say, July and August, or some of July and August to do that work. So you really want an empty Parkhurst by, let's just say for fun, the early July of 23. That means that carriage house project would have to be done by then. And if we then go backwards from that and say the carriage house is at least a 6-month project, I think is a fair assessment, then if you go backwards, you're talking about wanting to have that carriage house under construction by the time this debt override vote happens in January. And that would mean the design would have to be, the design and bidding would be happening next fall, the fall of 22. So that's why I don't think the carriage house solution, if that were the solution, can wait till January of 23 to start.
Okay.
So it's long-winded, but that's my thought on it.
And associated with that, then just to underscore the point, then therefore we feel more confident if we were to identify and fully fund the swing space solution, whatever it may be. And certainly the school committee has said it should be the carriage house step 1, Parkhurst step 2, but whatever it should be, do you feel more confident that can we more confidently say kids will be accommodated off-site by the fall of 23 if we're funding something as early as this spring than if we are waiting until the fall?
Well, yeah, I mean, unless you just did a whole bunch of modulars somewhere.
There's one procedural question there. It wouldn't be just funding the design of the carriage house. It would actually be funding the design and construction of the carriage house, because there wouldn't be time between spring town meeting and the next town meeting.
Yeah, I'm thinking the carriage house construction, it would be something like January through July of 23, and then August of 23 plus or minus is when you get the Parkhurst ready. This, if the premise is to vacate the Parkhurst by doing the carriage house project, then yeah, you want to be starting construction by January 23, which is when your town meeting vote is, which means you're bidding the carriage house in November and December of 22, which means you're doing design work in late summer, fall of 22 in order to prepare bid documents, right?
And what I'm suggesting, Mark, is it's even one step bigger. So it's the construction documents for carriage house, it's the construction funding for the carriage house, and it's design dollars and construction dollars for whatever we may deem as necessary at Parkhurst. And so in 2010, we put between $1 and $1.1 million into Parkhurst. And unfortunately, but fortunately, we had a pipe break in January 3 or 4 years ago. It flooded the lower level of the building. We had a massive insurance claim. We have beautiful classrooms down there. EFPBC should go check them out. They look like brand new spaces. So the buildings, and there's definitely stuff we need to invest in. But what I'm suggesting is it's carriage house all in plus design dollars. And maybe we throw, I don't know if it's $500,000, 800,000, some whatever it is we feel we need to put into Parkhurst to get it ready. If we were to do that in the spring, then our design team is able to get going on that, and that no longer becomes some critical path exercise for the development of Lynch. And it's all unreimbursable anyway through the MSBA. And the longer we wait, everything becomes more expensive anyway.
Chris, similar to the discussion about future expansion, it feels like not preparing for the option, given that we don't really know what the community response is, what the town response is, seems like a bad position to put us in. So I absolutely agree with you. I think making Parkhurst available means that there is an option. And if it's not, the option is a whole bunch of modular classrooms, which is significantly less appealing.
And my last point there, Mark, too, is I would not want to see us fail. I really do believe the carriage house option is the most appropriate, cost-effective option. But if that should fail, I would much rather it fail in the spring than have it fail in the fall, because now we've really run out of time. So if we're going to fail, let's fail with enough time to scramble and build ourselves a safety net.
Fail early.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. MSBA is in it too, and I'm not sure. We need to get them convinced too. Cost is less, duration is less by, keeping existing lynch in place. So we have to iron out so many things. I guess what I'm saying is maybe to get MSBA on board with PSR, we also need to present them with the citing options of these kids, whether we want to move 2 grades or whatnot. Anyway, I would drive to my question. Charlie, I guess you have shown 3 phases. I know from the get-going, I have the concern. My question is, are we putting a restriction, the phase 1, to get it prepped, talking about the site prep, that would also happen in the summertime so that the kids are not there. It's more than putting fences, right? So to get it to prep to the building pad level, I'm not concerned about phase 2 happening. The kids are in place. I heard phase 3 might be in the summer so that the building would come down, the kids are away. And so I'm also asking the question, is it also in your mind for the site prep, the major work of bringing the trees down, getting all that prepped, sort of a building pad ready, would also happen in the summer months, and is it too short?
So we have our premise here in this document so far is that this work was happening in the fall, not in the summer. And the reason for that was that there's no way we could ever have the documents together to do a bid by, we would literally be, in order to do summer work, if this was design bid build, we would be bidding this package in April.
Yeah.
And that's 3 months after after you voted the project. So it's thoroughly unrealistic. We usually need 8, 9, 10 months to put documents together. We have a fighting chance of doing a design bid build package with this early piece of it on it, maybe if we can bid it in the fall and then start this work in the fall. And that's where we landed in the fall. It does, the delivery method does matter. If we did CM at risk, which I'm not sure the town has any appetite for, if we did CM at risk, we could in fact release early packages. CMs are generally more willing to go with skinnier sets of drawings for early packages if they're things like clearing, grubbing, and the like, and early enabling. And they will do that based on design development drawings and things like that. So, but design bid build hard bid, there's just no way. We have to have absolute complete 100%, 110% drawings. So part of it has to do with delivery methodology, but I can't, so far I haven't wrapped my head around the idea that it would be an easy thing to do to release multiple bids that were literally hard bid, design bid build packages to contractors to do these pieces of work and expect to get much success in the bidding. And we would be challenged by having multiple contractors involved, right? Because we'd have contractor A bid and do one piece, we'd have contractor B bid and do a second piece, and then we'd have contractor C, who was interested in the whole job, do the rest of it. So maybe that's possible. I haven't had that experience. VO was a hard bid job and a difficult job because the contractor wasn't very good, but it was a design bid build. But in that case, the enabling package was literally you get the whole site, go tear the building down and leave us with a flat site. That's easy. And that's an easy thing to scope. It's an easy thing to quantify. It's an easy thing to bid. And it's a really easy thing to hand off. The problem here is the kind of intertwined nature of all these phases. And so CMs, when you do a CM job, you give them responsibility for the whole thing. You say, yeah, you're going to give us a series of mini GMPs, and you're going to chop this thing up into pieces and do them as we deliver these drawings. Frankly, the site work too, we got to get permitted. And if you ever had a sensitive environmental permitting project, this is it. So I also don't know that we could be in a position to be fully permitted by the summer.
Yes.
2023 either. We could try. We could usually start permitting with design development drawings. So if we could finish design development in, April, May.
Yeah. So let me twist the
question. We could try to do environmental permitting in the spring. And if it didn't take too long, we possibly could have our approvals by early summer. I just think summer might be pushing our luck. I don't know.
Yeah, let me twist my question. We have seen design bid build, we have seen construction at risk. I wasn't not at all driving towards CM at risk at all. I obviously design bid build would quite work. I was trying to drive the question with knowing what we know now. Could we envision for this amount of site work could happen in the fall? Or does it sort of imposes on us that we need to take into consideration that it might very well go smooth, whether it's design bid build or whether it's CM at risk, that it has to be during the months of summer that we can make it happen. I don't think.
Well, making it happen is
so anyway.
Making it happen has requirements that may or may not be possible. CM at risk, this is a job that to me would benefit potentially of any job I've ever seen from CM at risk, but I understand it's not the way the town necessarily wants to operate. So if that's the case, we need to work around the restrictions of the design bid build sort of structure. And because CM at risk gives you tons of flexibility, you also pay a big premium for it, certainly in your bids. So I think asking them, I think that will matter in terms of the future planning. I think trying to just fine tune the schedule around permitting will matter, and then making a decision about whether the school is comfortable with construction in the fall. And we would, if it wasn't CM, if it was design bid build, we would have to construct a separate bid package that was clearing, grubbing, temporary laydown, temporary measures around pickup and drop off, limited abatement and demolition, temporary parking, though that would be the scope. And so we'd be looking for a contractor who could do that and was willing to bid on that value of work. And then they would leave the site and we'd be bidding again to another contractor to do the balance of the project. Right?
Well, anyway, in my mind, I think we're back to the question of, are we better off by shifting the kids away and do the construction as opposed to facing the delivery method? So that's why I just wanted to bring up the phase one and just open the discussion, but I wasn't not at all sort of gearing towards CM at risk now. I'm not sold on that, but that was the purpose of asking the question.
Well, but it's a very real consideration. And frankly, the town would still spend a whole lot more. Vast sums of money more if you provided swing space for all the students at the school versus the premium for a CM. I mean, CM would be a cost-saving measure relative to removing every student from the site. Just saying.
If it went right. If it went well.
Well, I mean, we've had a lot of good luck with CMs. You do pay a premium up front. You pay a whole lot less in change orders, and they tend to deliver.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thanks, Jay. I don't know if the attendee is still here because the comments were anonymous, but we did get 2 comments and I just wanted to make sure we address them. So the first one had to do with outdoor play space. And I think it's a valid concern, Charlie, in terms of the phasing diagrams, just making sure that it's clear in each phase what the actual play space is and what the impacts are on play space during each of the phases so that parents and community members could understand that. The second one has to do with abatement, and I think it's important here just to point out that abatement as a process is something that is taken very seriously in every jurisdiction, but I think in particular in Massachusetts and in the towns around Boston. And it's like a highly regulated activity that requires special workforce, special certifications. And the concern that was expressed here was that, look, if there's some danger that my kid's going to be exposed to lead or asbestos during the abatement process, I'm out. I'm not sending my kid to Lynch. And I just want to make clear here that in my experience, that abatement projects are extremely controlled, extremely carefully managed, cost a fortune because of that. But literally everything is contained within the zone of the abatement. And they often occur in occupied facilities. They occur in occupied facilities with children in them. And it is generally assumed to be something that is managed carefully enough that there is little to no risk to the people who are outside of the zone of work. And even the people who are in the zone of work have to wear special protective gear and get training in it. And so I just wanted to put that out there that to the individual who was concerned about that if we were to do an abatement project, we would do everything in our power to make sure that that abatement followed all of the rules and regulations that are already in place to ensure that there is no danger to the safety of the children in the school, or else we would never propose it, period.
Thank you. Chris, question?
I would only add to everything Mark Scott just said, a comma, and then as we did at Winchester High School, where we dealt with all of those issues. And parents may not be aware, but we've had a number of abatement projects at Lynch over the years where it's been necessary due to like failure of materials. And we replaced the ceiling in the cafeteria a couple of years ago. And most unfortunately, at the end of one summer, 4 or 5 years ago, we actually had an arsonist show up and set fire to the main lobby of the Lynch School. So there was damage. And then, of course, there was abatement that was required. So very sort of rigorous certification for folks to make that work. So I wanted to, I'm sensitive of the time, Jay, because it's 8 o'clock, and I know Colleen wanted to give us an update on the subcommittee process, but I guess I have 2 thoughts will be helpful. Charlie has sort of presented us with a diagram that shows how it could be done moving 2 grade levels off. I'm curious to know if the juice is worth the squeeze, would it make sense to look at moving 12 classrooms off instead of 8? Like if we move 3 grade levels, if there was a way to do it, which could be, Parkhurst plus 4 modulars, perhaps. If you think that is a valuable exercise, I'd be interested in seeing it. That was sort of just part 1. And then part 2 would be, I would like to, what I would recommend is between Tappe and Hill, I think we can get a pretty good sense of what modular classrooms are going to cost, and we can make allowances for things like power, tel data, water, domestic water, sewer. We can do all of that, I think, with a pretty good degree of confidence. But would it make sense to have Tappe come out to Parkhurst, take another walkthrough? I mean, I know you did it back in the summer when we were talking about central office and the carriage house. Could it be helpful for you guys to take another look at Parkhurst and sort of identify the list of things that you think might need to be addressed? We're going to use that as swing space, and we could sort of develop a kind of a schematic budget, because if in fact this idea of going to spring town meeting to fund this has legs, we need to be pretty confident about what it is we're asking for. And I don't know what that number is. I mean, I've been saying for a while, I think it's at least $300,000. I don't think it's $1 million, but maybe it is. I think that would be helpful if we're going to have that conversation.
Happy to do that.
That was all, Jay, I had.
Right. Can we close and move on to the subcommittee? Mark, do you still have a question? Okay. Colleen, you ready for an update?
Sure.
All right. Take it
We had a
away.
great, we had a great 2-hour session with the design team today. I took pretty detailed notes. Pete, Mark, folks had some really good questions. As a sort of overview, the project is tracking 53 points right now for lead silver, but as a team, we felt we could pretty easily get to gold. So I'm going to do a markup of the checklist just based on credits that are in my experience that are sort of free, easy points. And but we understand that really is just a sort of sill of where we're starting. So from the MSBA perspective, we don't want to go in with more points than we can verify and then have to backtrack. Additionally, we confirmed as a team that we're targeting the 2% reimbursement. So I think it's 13 energy points, Charlie.
14.
That we have to. Is it 14? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we also talked about an EUI. So folks that don't use that terminology all the time, it's energy use intensity. So it's an apples to apples comparison of what like buildings use per square foot in terms of energy use. And so we agreed on a 25 EUI, which is the minimum of what we need in order to take advantage of the Mass Save, the Eversource. It's a sort of a double reimbursement. So I think it ends up being $2.25 a square foot. We get $1 for performance verification through modeling, and then we get an additional $1.25. I might be reversing that after we can prove an operation that we're at a 25 EUI. So those are sort of the big picture pieces. But we were just bringing back those thoughts to the committee tonight. I don't know if we collectively need to vote on our targets for EUI. In terms of next steps with the utilities, I think everyone agrees the sooner the better, but Charlie and team have told us essentially that, National Grid and Kim Cullinane from Eversource generally starts the process once we have an approved project through MSBA. So I think we all feel comfortable with that timeline, if speaking for everyone here. What did I miss?
I would just add, Colleen, we had a brief conversation about air conditioning. The school committee did discuss and vote that we expect Lynch to be air conditioned, but recognize that, the approach, the systems and how we go about that would really be between our design team and the EFPBC. And so there's already, a concept around that. We did talk as well at the school committee table. We recognized that years ago there was a kind of an energy policy that was voted that has to do with set points in both the cooling season and the heating season. And what we've acknowledged is that, it speaks to temperature. It doesn't really speak to humidity. It doesn't speak to air volume, air velocity, et cetera, all of which are sort of key attributes of what we think of when we think about what makes a space, comfortable. So we're interested in understanding that. I think, and somebody pointed out at the end of the meeting that the EFPBC scorecard, LEAD, wrong acronym, the LEAD scorecard includes points for, the comfort of spaces. And I guess I look forward to following up with Pete later. I think Pete was suggesting there might be some revisiting of the set point in the heating season. I think I heard him say that might go up a couple of degrees. So, we just, all I can say is I think on behalf of the school committee and Frank, we want to keep the lines of communication open on this.
Yeah. I think we all agreed that the conversation was pretty truncated. We talked about site development goals, water use reduction, energy, materials, occupant health, all that good stuff, all of which require, I would think, at least an hour for each of those sessions. So we can figure out how we squeeze that in to Charlie's timeline, because I know everything's a little bit compressed on the design side. Maybe prioritize energy and water. We can think about materials kind of as the project moves on, that kind of thing.
Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, one quick thing. There was some confusion about whether or not LEED Gold for new construction projects was a mandate, or whether it was a recommendation, or whether it had even been voted on. There seemed to be some confusion about it, but that would be helpful to know prior to the submission of this next submission, because if the requirement is LEED Gold, I think we probably need to look at how we show LEED Gold in the submission. But
Yeah, so that's a good point. So Ken sent over, and I can also pull up the language in the OPR. It was voted on in 2009. They didn't lead. So LEED Gold is the target. They don't say which version of LEED, and so in 2009 that was a previous version. I agree with you, Mark. I think that's part of the reason. I think also for having some more detailed discussions. LEED Gold is one thing, and then there's also the climate policy, of which Winchester is adopted as well. So there's some very particular items in there that would relate to this building as well that need to be considered. So yeah, I'm happy to circulate. I think Todd, we didn't totally confirm if the OPR that's posted right now in Google Docs is the latest. So I have that in my camp to upload. But I also know that Ken Pruitt is here as one of the participants. So I don't know if there's anything further we need to say about the select board approval.
I would just chip in. I don't think the school committee has been aware of it. And if the select board sets that as a goal, again, to my comment about communication, because Mass General Law gives the authority to school committees to establish building committees. We had every opportunity to put that in the RFP for the project. That didn't come out from reviews of the drafts. But I think as we said in the meeting, I think it's an admirable and frankly attainable goal. We should be doing it kind of regardless of policy. And I can't remember, and I'm going to put Charlie on the spot. I don't remember, is VO a LEED Gold certified building? I have doubt.
I think it was CHIPS.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And so I just raise it.
Which the MSBA also recognizes.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just want to make the point, if the select board voted in 2009 that buildings have to be LEED Gold, that was before we designed VO. And VO was not a LEED certified building. So maybe the conversation really ought to be around just sort of what are we trying to do? What are the goals, regardless of the labels or the rulers, as you pointed out, Colleen, that we applied to it? Like what are we really trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so I mean, here I'm sharing screen again. This is on the Google Docs. So it's not just LEED Gold. There's also some particular requirements. So it's either Mass CHIPS or LEED.
Okay.
I copied this directly so when you see spelling errors or things like that, that is not me. I copied it verbatim because I didn't want to look like I was taking something and repurposing it. So I think it's helpful for us all to look at this section in particular. I think we're all going to give our best faith effort. I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to be able to get to LEED Gold. But there's lots of ways to get there. And I think some of our priorities are much higher and greater than the level of LEED certification too. So I don't want to get hung up on that.
Well, Todd, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that during the meeting that we decided that we would most likely submit for LEED Silver for the PSR because it's easier to go for a higher certification later than it is to kind of claw back.
that's fine. I mean, if there's no impact to it, it seems fine. We know what our aspirations are. So if
Right, and the metric that the MSBA truly cares about is this energy performance. I mean, that's what they tie their reimbursement to, and what I know that the town has a different, has its own agenda, but from a specific project specific point of view, what's really meaningful to this project and into the community, therefore, is getting those additional incentive points, right? Because you get more reimbursement.
Absolutely.
So what we're trying to do is make sure you get those reimbursements. So that's what we're trying to make sure we lock in. The topic of lead silver versus lead gold is more of a town thing. And yeah, we don't see that there's a big issue with ending up at lead gold. And I think Todd is right that it's easier to say later, oh, we did better. And I don't think the MSBA will care one way or the other as long as we hit those 14 energy points.
That's great. And as long as we're not leaving money on the table, it sounds like you are.
We don't want to lose money. We don't want to leave MSBA money on the table. That's certainly true. And actually, we're really interested, we're interested in you getting the utility company money too. So those are both worthy. Those are the two sort of metrics that matter to us. And the lead gold thing is fine.
So Jay, I just pulled this up so we didn't lose track of anything Meg needs us to deal with tonight.
Meg, no invoices?
No, none.
All right. Other business?
I've heard from one member who had done a review of the MEP narrative for the carriage house and just asked, again, remind people, send your comments to Jay, copy Charlie, you can copy me, and they would appreciate the feedback. And then we're holding, Jay, then we go to next meeting dates.
Yes.
The 28th.
And the 7th.
And the 7th. Oh, Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question, Chris, for you and the school committee. Is there anything that this committee has to do for you all to make a decision as to whether to put forward advancement of the carriage house in Parkhurst for spring 10?
I appreciate the bluntness of the question. The EFPBC in the past has actually been the public body that puts forward articles on the warrant for, school projects, and most recently the McCall project, phase 1, phase 2. And very often the school committee would, opt to, let's say, co-sponsor if the timing works out. It's a little different this year because, as we all know, the municipal elections now happen earlier, but town meeting still happens at the same time. So it kind of depends what the complexion of different public bodies are in terms of what they want to react to what's on the warrant. Having said that, I believe what is most appropriate would be actually for the EFPBC to vote to put an article on the spring warrant for the carriage house and an allowance for swing space, which, I don't think we're quite ready to say tonight what that is, although I think our expectation has always been it's Parkhurst. Certainly the main floor up there can accommodate 2 grade levels, maybe 2 grade levels plus. And if Charlie and his team can tell us sort of what that's worth, I could certainly be prepared to bring back, Frank and I could bring back a tool to the next EFPBC meeting that kind of cost models what that looks like. If we did that, we do not need to have, just so everybody understands, we don't need to have dollar values ready. It's a 3-step process. You got to get an article submitted before the warrant closes. The warrant closes on, I'm reaching for it, Meg, it's Friday, right? March 10th?
I think it's the 11th, but yeah.
Excuse me, yes, the 11th. So the 11th. So we have time, Mark. We could discuss this in more detail at the meeting on the 28th. If we wanted to vote something on Monday, March 7th, that's just the article that gets onto the warrant. And then afterwards, there's time where we can then actually develop the motion. The motion would need to speak to the funding amount, the funding source, and we can have some conversation about how it gets paid for. And then the third piece is the background language that's, could be a page if it has to be, to sort of explain what the heck we're trying to do. But the first thing is to sort of get our foot in the door with an article, and we could vote that on the 7th. If we were to do that, the school committee does have a meeting scheduled on Tuesday, the 8th, and could certainly, co-sponsor something, but I think it would best come first from the EFPBC, given that we've handed this off to the EFPBC, both the Lynch project and the carriage house, frankly.
Chris, that's the agenda on the 28th to make sure we have time to discuss that.
Yeah, we'll do that. We can add that. That's okay with Jay.
Yes,
Chris, I
definitely.
think it's important that we do it because, the EFPBC is chartered by town meeting. We report to town meeting, not to the school committee, not to the board of selectmen. They have members on the committee. So yes, I think it would be best if the EFPB puts forth any articles to be presented to town meeting. And it's great that, and typically in the past, as you say, the school committee has co-sponsored those articles.
And the select board may want to do it too, whether, again, this is I wish we all were looking into a crystal ball a year ago when we changed the town charter on elections, but I believe the last meeting of the select board is Monday, the 7th. So I don't have a lot of confidence if we're meeting at 6 p.m. we're going to go jump on their meeting at 9 p.m. and they're going to vote to co-sponsor something. I think they need sort of a longer runway to understand stuff. But I do think that the school committee could, be on board. I don't want to speak for what Frank thinks, but that's my estimation. So we could certainly add that on the agenda for the 28th.
But if we put it on the agenda, Chris, for the 28th, and we agreed to do something, then on the 29th, the select board and the school committee would know what it was that we wanted generally to do and would be able to put it on the agenda for the 7th for the select board and for the 8th for the school committee, assuming that we followed through with whatever commitment we had made, right?
Right. So it's kind of like what the select board did with us, a week ago, right? The select board instructed management to develop an article for the spring warrant to transfer the Wellfield parcel. There's no article yet, but it's clear what the intention is. So we could absolutely do something like that. Okay. That's great.
Anything else? Get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Geetha?
Aye.
Colleen?
Aye.
Don? Brian?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
I think that's it. So moved. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Nice job.
Night.
Bye.
Thanks.